My 6-year-old put a high schooler in the ICU, and the trauma doctor requested her for a case study. The call came from University Hospital at 9:30 p.m. on a Friday night. I was finishing dessert at a mandatory work dinner when my phone lit up with 3 successive calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The first voicemail was from a hospital administrator asking me to come immediately regarding my daughter Nora. The second was from a police officer named Detective Kyle Brennan, saying there'd been an incident at my home involving serious injury. The third was from my neighbor asking if everything was okay, because she'd seen ambulances and police cars outside our house. I excused myself from the table, my hands already shaking as I tried calling my wife Julia, who was working the night shift at her hospital across town. She didn't answer. I tried our home phone. Nothing. I got in my car and drove 20 minutes to University Hospital with my heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. My daughter Nora was 6 years old, first grade, tiny for her age. She still slept with 3 stuffed animals and asked me to check under her bed for monsters every night. Whatever incident involved her couldn't possibly be what the detective's tone suggested. The emergency room parking lot was half empty when I arrived. I ran inside and gave my name at reception. The woman's expression changed immediately from professional courtesy to something more complex, concern mixed with wariness. She made a call, and within 2 minutes, Detective Brennan appeared. He was maybe 40, weathered face, tired eyes. He asked me to follow him to a private waiting room, and my stomach dropped because private waiting rooms meant serious conversations. We walked past the main ER into a family consultation area. Inside were 2 other people, a man and woman in their late 40s, both wearing business casual clothing that screamed upper-middle-class professionals. The woman had been crying. The man's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping. Detective Brennan introduced them as Gregory and Diane Thornton. Their 17-year-old son Blake was currently in surgery for severe head trauma, skull fracture, brain bleed, critical condition, and my 6-year-old daughter had put him there. I couldn't process the words, couldn't make them fit together into meaning. Gregory Thornton spoke first. His voice was controlled, but vibrating with rage barely contained beneath professional courtesy. He informed me that my daughter had violently attacked his son with a weapon while Blake was babysitting at our house. Blake had been hired through a family friend's recommendation to watch Nora and her 3-year-old brother Finn while Julia worked her night shift and I attended my work dinner. Gregory explained that he and his wife were both attorneys. Corporate law. They knew their rights. They knew my daughter's actions constituted aggravated assault, possibly attempted murder given the severity of Blake's injuries. They would be pressing criminal charges despite Nora's age, would be filing a civil lawsuit for damages they estimated would exceed $1 million once medical bills and long-term care costs were calculated. Diane added that Blake had been accepted to Princeton, had a full scholarship, had his entire future ahead of him before my daughter had tried to kill him for no reason. I asked where Nora was. Detective Brennan said she was with a victim advocate in another room being evaluated. I asked what he meant by victim advocate, and he said they provided support for children involved in traumatic incidents. I said I needed to see my daughter immediately. Gregory stepped forward and said I needed to understand the severity of what my child had done, that Blake might not survive the night, that if he did survive, he might have permanent brain damage, that my daughter had shown a level of violence that suggested serious psychological problems, that I should be preparing for my child to be removed from my custody and placed in juvenile psychiatric care while criminal proceedings moved forward. His voice was getting louder with each sentence, and I felt rage flash through me hot enough to make my vision blur. I told him to back away from me, told him I'd listen to the police, but not to him, told him his son was in surgery and mine was apparently being questioned, and I needed to see her before anyone said another word about charges or lawsuits or custody. Detective Brennan put a hand on my shoulder, said we could see Nora in a moment, but first I needed to understand what they knew so far. He pulled out a tablet and showed me photos. Blake Thornton's student ID, clean-cut kid, handsome, varsity soccer, honor roll. Then photos from the scene, Blake on our kitchen floor. Blood pooling around his head, massive swelling on the right side of his skull. Paramedics working on him, more photos. Our cast-iron skillet, 12 inches across, probably 8 pounds, sitting on the kitchen tile covered in blood and hair. Detective Brennan explained that based on preliminary investigation, Nora had struck Blake twice with the skillet, once to his leg causing him to fall, once to his head, causing the skull fracture. Blake had been unconscious when first responders arrived. Nora had been found sitting with her brother Finn in the living room. Both children had blood on their clothing. Nora had refused to speak to officers, had only asked repeatedly if Finn was okay. Finn had been taken to the pediatric ward for evaluation. He had injuries consistent with rough handling, but nothing life-threatening. I asked what kind of injuries. Detective Brennan hesitated, then said Finn had a dislocated shoulder, bruising on both arms, finger-shaped marks suggesting he'd been grabbed forcefully, minor whiplash consistent with being shaken. He was sedated now and stable. I felt cold spread through my entire body. Asked if Blake had done that to Finn. Gregory Thornton immediately said absolutely not, said Blake would never hurt a child, said whatever injuries Finn had must have occurred before Blake arrived. I said Blake had been at our house for 3 hours before I got this call. The timeline didn't work. Diane said I was trying to deflect blame from my violent daughter by accusing their innocent son. Her voice was shaking, on the edge of breaking. I understood suddenly that she genuinely believed Blake was the victim here, that she couldn't conceive of her Princeton-bound son doing anything wrong, that in her mind, my 6-year-old was a monster who'd attacked unprovoked. Detective Brennan asked if we could all sit down, said there were some things we needed to review before making any determinations. We sat in uncomfortable plastic chairs arranged in a circle. The detective pulled up something on his tablet, asked if I was aware we had security cameras in our home. I felt my heart skip, said yes. We'd installed a nanny cam system 6 months ago after a break-in scare in our neighborhood. 4 cameras, living room, kitchen, playroom, hallway, all connected to cloud storage. I'd honestly forgotten about them, hadn't checked the footage in months. Detective Brennan said officers had accessed the system with our emergency access codes. Said what they'd found changed everything. He turned the tablet toward Gregory and Diane, asked them to watch, started playing a video. I could see our kitchen from the camera mounted above the refrigerator. Timestamp showed 8:15 p.m., 45 minutes before I'd gotten the emergency call. The video showed Blake in our kitchen holding Finn by one arm. My 3-year-old son was crying, screaming. Blake was shaking him, not gently, violently. Hard enough that Finn's head snapped back and forth, hard enough that even through the silent video, I could see the terror on my baby's face. Blake was yelling at Finn. I couldn't hear the words, but I could read his lips. Shut up. Shut the fuck up. Stop crying, you little bitch. Then Blake twisted Finn's arm. Deliberately, purposefully, I saw Finn's face contort in agony. Saw his mouth open in what must have been a scream of pain. Saw his shoulder dislocate, pop out of socket. Blake laughed. Actually laughed. He pulled out his phone with his free hand. Started filming Finn. Recording my son's suffering. The timestamp ran forward. 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. Blake kept shaking Finn, kept recording, kept laughing. At the 8-minute mark, a small figure appeared in the kitchen doorway. Nora, my 6-year-old daughter. She was wearing her pajamas, must have heard the screaming from upstairs. The video showed Nora freeze, process what she was seeing, her small face transforming from confusion to horror to something else, something cold. She yelled at Blake. I could see her mouth forming words. Let him go. Stop hurting him. Blake looked up, said something back. His expression was contemptuous, dismissive, threatening. He pointed toward the stairs, telling her to go back up. Nora stood there for maybe 3 seconds. Then she turned and ran out of frame. Gregory made a sound, almost triumphant. Said there. She had opportunity to get help. She chose violence instead. Detective Brennan held up a hand. Said keep watching. 30 seconds later, Nora reappeared. She was dragging something, the cast-iron skillet. It was nearly as big as her torso. She could barely lift it. But she pulled it across the kitchen floor toward Blake. He didn't see her at first. Too busy tormenting Finn. Too busy recording. Too busy enjoying himself. When Blake finally noticed Nora, he turned toward her, laughed, said something. Nora didn't respond. She lifted the skillet with both hands. It took visible effort, her entire body straining. She swung it at Blake's leg, The impact made Gregory flinch, even watching silently. Blake's knee buckled. He dropped Finn, stumbled backward, grabbed the counter for balance. Nora moved. Fast, impossibly fast for a 6-year-old holding an 8-pound skillet. She got between Blake and Finn. Her brother was on the floor crying and clutching his arm. Blake straightened up, his face contorted with rage. He moved toward Nora, reached for her. She swung the skillet again, this time overhead, this time aimed at his head. The arc was perfect. The timing was perfect. The skillet connected with the right side of Blake's skull just above his ear. His head snapped sideways. His eyes rolled back. He dropped. Just collapsed. Went down hard and didn't move. Nora immediately released the skillet. It clattered to the floor. She ran to Finn. Knelt beside him, her small hands gentle as she checked him over. Then she stood and ran out of frame. 15 seconds later, she was back with our cordless phone. She was calling 911. The timestamp showed she called at 8:24 p.m., 9 minutes after Blake had started torturing Finn, 6 minutes before I'd received the first emergency call. The video ended. The room was completely silent. Gregory and Diane sat frozen. Their faces had gone pale. Diane's mouth was opening and closing, but no sound came out. Gregory was staring at the blank tablet screen. Detective Brennan spoke quietly, asked if they wanted to see it again. Gregory shook his head, asked in a hoarse voice if there was audio. The detective said yes, asked if they wanted to hear it. Diane made a choking sound, said no, said she'd seen enough. Gregory looked at me, then looked away. The righteous fury had drained completely from his expression. Left behind was horror and shame and the dawning realization that their son was not who they thought he was. Detective Brennan said the audio was worse than the video. Blake's words were clear. Calling Finn names, mocking his speech. Finn had developmental delays, was in speech therapy, verbal skills of maybe a 2-year-old. Blake had known that, had targeted that, had filmed it for what the detective suspected was planned posting on social media. They'd found Blake's phone in his pocket, found the video still recording when paramedics arrived, found other videos, older videos, other children, other babysitting jobs. That got my attention fast. I asked what other videos. Detective Brennan said they were still reviewing Blake's phone, but preliminary examination showed at least 6 videos of him abusing children he'd been hired to watch. Ages ranging from 2 to 8. Nothing as severe as what he'd done to Finn, but still disturbing. Pushing kids, mocking them, making them cry while he filmed, posting some videos to private social media accounts where his friends could watch and comment. The videos went back 18 months, roughly when Blake had started babysitting regularly, making money from families who trusted him, families who thought they were hiring a responsible high school student, an honor roll kid, a Princeton-bound scholar. Gregory stood up abruptly, said he needed air, walked out of the room. Diane stayed seated. She was crying silently now, tears running down her face. She looked at me and said she was sorry, said she didn't know, said Blake had been different lately, distant, secretive. But she'd attributed it to normal teenage behavior. She said her son needed help, serious psychological help. Said if he survived, she'd make sure he got it. Said she wouldn't fight any charges, wouldn't file any lawsuit, just wanted her son to live and get treatment. I said I wanted to see Nora. Detective Brennan nodded, led me down a hallway to another private room. Inside was a woman in her 30s wearing casual clothing and an ID badge identifying her as Amanda Cross, victim advocate with the county services. Sitting next to her on a small couch was my daughter. Nora looked so small, so fragile. Her dark hair was tangled. Her pajamas had blood spatter across the front, dried blood on her hands and arms. Not her blood, Blake's blood. She was holding a juice box but hadn't drunk any. When she saw me, she dropped it and ran across the room. I caught her, held her. She wrapped her arms around my neck and pressed her face into my shoulder. She was shaking. I could feel her small body trembling against mine. I sat down with her in my lap and asked if she was okay. She nodded. Asked in a small voice if Finn was okay. I said yes. Finn was going to be fine. She started crying then, actually sobbing, all the fear and shock and trauma pouring out. I held her and let her cry and tried to understand how my gentle 6-year-old had done what that video showed. Amanda Cross explained that Nora had been very brave, had given a clear statement about what happened, had been worried primarily about her brother. Had asked repeatedly if she was in trouble for hitting Blake, had asked if Blake was going to hurt Finn again. Amanda said Nora was experiencing normal trauma response, shock, fear, guilt, all completely understandable given what she'd witnessed and done. Detective Brennan asked if I could get Nora to walk through the events one more time for his report. I looked at my daughter, asked if she could tell me what happened. She nodded, took a shaky breath, started talking in her small voice. She said she'd been in her room reading, heard Finn screaming, knew something was wrong because he sounded scared, not angry. She'd run downstairs and found Blake hurting Finn. Saw Blake shaking Finn and filming him. She'd yelled at Blake to stop. Blake told her to go away or he'd hurt her too. She saw Finn's arm hanging wrong. Knew Blake had broken something. She'd gone back upstairs. I asked why she went upstairs. Nora said she knew she couldn't fight Blake. He was too big, too strong. She needed a weapon, needed something to make him stop. She'd thought about calling 911 first, but was scared Blake would hear her and hurt Finn worse before help arrived. She'd remembered the big pan I used for cooking, the heavy one. She'd run back downstairs and grabbed it. It was really heavy, hard to carry, but she managed. She'd walked up behind Blake while he was busy with Finn, swung the pan at his leg because that's where she could reach. Wanted to make him let go of Finn. He dropped Finn and stumbled. Nora got between them. Blake got angry, started coming toward her. She knew if he got hold of her, she wouldn't be able to protect Finn, so she swung the pan at his head. Swung as hard as she could. He fell down and didn't get up. She checked on Finn, then called 911, then waited. She'd been too scared to move Finn because she remembered me saying you shouldn't move hurt people, so she'd just stayed with him and tried to keep him calm until help arrived. Detective Brennan asked Nora if she'd been scared. She nodded. He asked if she'd wanted to hurt Blake. Nora thought about it, then said she'd wanted to stop Blake from hurting Finn, wanted to make sure Blake couldn't hurt anyone. She'd hit him as hard as she could because she'd needed to make sure he stayed down. The detective made notes, told Nora she'd done the right thing, that protecting her brother was brave and good, that she wasn't in trouble, that Blake was the one who'd done wrong. Nora asked if Blake was going to jail. Detective Brennan said probably yes. Once Blake recovered enough to leave the hospital, he'd be arrested, charged with multiple counts of child abuse, endangerment, assault. The videos on his phone showed a pattern of behavior, evidence of planning and intent. Blake was 17, would likely be charged as an adult given the severity and premeditation. Nora asked if that meant Finn was safe. The detective said yes. Blake wouldn't be able to hurt anyone for a very long time. I asked if we could see Finn. A nurse appeared and led us up to the pediatric ward. 3rd floor, bright hallways decorated with cartoon characters. Finn was in a private room. He looked impossibly small in the hospital bed. His left arm was in a sling. His shoulder had been relocated, but the doctors wanted to monitor him overnight. Make sure there was no nerve damage or complications. He had IV fluids running, bruises already darkening on his pale skin where Blake had grabbed him. He was asleep, sedated. I stood next to his bed and felt rage so pure and hot, I actually had to grip the bed rail to stay steady. Nora climbed up next to her brother, careful not to jostle him. She took his good hand in both of hers, whispered that she was sorry she hadn't protected him faster, that she should have known Blake was bad. I told her none of this was her fault, that she'd saved Finn, that she was the bravest person I knew. She looked up at me with those huge dark eyes and asked if I was disappointed in her for hurting someone. I felt my throat close, pulled her into a hug, told her I was proud of her, told her she'd done exactly what needed to be done. A doctor entered. Tall man in his 50s wearing surgical scrubs and a white coat. He introduced himself as Dr. Francis Reyes, Chief of Trauma Surgery. He'd just finished operating on Blake Thornton. The surgery had gone well. They'd relieved pressure on Blake's brain, repaired the skull fracture. Blake would survive, would likely make a full recovery physically, might have some memory issues related to the injury, but nothing catastrophic. Dr. Reyes said he'd been briefed by police on what had happened, had reviewed the security camera footage. He looked at Nora with an expression I couldn't quite read, then asked if he could speak with me privately for a moment. We stepped out into the hallway. Dr. Reyes pulled up something on his tablet, showed me CT scan images of Blake's skull, pointed to the fracture pattern. Explained that Blake had been hit at a very specific location, the Tyrian, where 4 skull bones meet, the thinnest part of the human skull, also directly over the middle meningeal artery. The impact had fractured the bones and caused bleeding from that artery. Standard trauma that required surgical intervention. Dr. Reyes zoomed in on the scan, showed me how the fracture radiated from a single point of impact. Perfect placement. He said in 20 years of trauma surgery, he'd seen professional fighters miss that target, seen trained combatants aim for it and hit surrounding structures instead. The Tyrian was small, maybe 2 inches in diameter, located above and behind the eye. Difficult to hit accurately, especially in a dynamic situation, especially with an improvised weapon. Especially by someone who'd never trained in combat or studied anatomy. He asked if Nora had any martial arts background, any self-defense training, any medical education in the family. I said no. None. Nora was 6. She'd been in gymnastics for 1 year. That was it. Dr. Reyes was quiet for a moment, then said what Nora had done was remarkable. Not just the protective action, but the targeting. Most people swinging a heavy object at someone's head would aim for the top of the skull. The frontal bone, strong, thick bone that could withstand significant impact. Nora had somehow hit the exact weak point, the one spot guaranteed to cause immediate incapacitation with relatively modest force. I said maybe it was luck, random chance. Dr. Reyes shook his head, said the security footage showed deliberation. Nora had adjusted her stance. Adjusted her grip, aimed carefully before swinging. The video showed her eyes tracking Blake's head, calculating, then striking. The placement was too precise to be accidental. He asked if I'd consent to Nora being interviewed by researchers studying threat response in children. Said he was working with a team, examining how young children assess and respond to dangerous situations, how they calculate risk and choose actions under extreme stress. Nora's case was exceptional, a 6-year-old recognizing her physical limitations against a larger opponent, choosing a weapon to compensate, using that weapon with precision that suggested intuitive understanding of human anatomy. Dr. Reyes said there were implications for emergency response training, for understanding how to develop protective instincts in children without teaching violence. He wanted to study Nora's cognitive process, understand how she'd made the decisions she'd made, learn what could be replicated or taught. I said I needed to think about it, needed to talk to my wife. Dr. Reyes nodded, gave me his card, said there was no pressure but the opportunity to study Nora's case was scientifically valuable, potentially could help other children in similar situations. He added one more thing, said most adults faced with what Nora had witnessed would have frozen, would have panicked, would have called for help and waited. Nora had assessed the situation, recognized the time constraint, calculated that intervention was necessary, selected an appropriate tool, and executed a plan that saved her brother's life. That level of tactical thinking was rare in adults. In a 6-year-old, it was unprecedented. The trauma center wanted to understand it. I thanked him and went back to Finn's room, found Nora asleep curled next to her brother on the hospital bed. Both my children in one bed, both injured by someone I'd trusted to protect them. I sat in the chair next to them and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 3 hours. Julia arrived 30 minutes later. She'd been in surgery when I called, had gotten my messages during her break, came straight to the hospital. I met her in the hallway and told her everything, showed her the security footage on Detective Brennan's tablet, watched her face cycle through disbelief, horror, rage, grief. When the video ended, she was shaking. She asked where Blake was, and I had to physically stop her from going to find him, told her he was in ICU under police guard. That going after him would only make things worse, that Blake would face justice. Julia went into Finn's room, spent 20 minutes examining both kids, checking Finn's shoulder, looking at Nora's hands where she'd gripped the skillet hard enough to leave marks. Julia was a pediatric nurse, knew what abuse looked like, knew what defensive injuries looked like, knew her children had been failed by the systems meant to protect them. She asked me how we'd missed this, how we'd hired a monster. I said Blake had been recommended by the Kingstons, family friends whose kids Blake had babysat for years. had seemed perfect, responsible, trustworthy. We'd done a background check. Nothing showed up. He was 17, clean record, good grades, no red flags. Julia said the Kingstons needed to know, needed to check their own children. I called them from the hospital, explained what happened. They were shocked, horrified, said Blake had watched their 2 kids maybe 15 times over the past year. Never had problems, kids never complained. I told them about the videos on Blake's phone, suggested they talk to their children, really talk to them, ask specific questions about Blake's behavior when parents weren't around. The Kingstons said they would. Called back 2 hours later. Their 8-year-old daughter had broken down crying when asked about Blake. Said he'd been mean to her, pushed her, called her names. Made her cry, then told her not to tell her parents or he'd tell everyone at school she was a baby. She'd been too scared and embarrassed to say anything. The Kingstons were devastated. Said they'd be contacting police to add their report to the investigation. Said they'd failed their daughter by not recognizing the signs. I told them we'd all failed. We'd all trusted the wrong person. Over the next week, the investigation expanded. Police identified 8 families Blake had babysat for regularly. 6 agreed to let detectives interview their children with child psychologists present. 5 of those 6 families had children who disclosed abuse, verbal harassment, physical intimidation, recording without permission. Blake had targeted kids too young or too scared to effectively report him, had counted on parental trust and his clean-cut image to protect him. The videos on his phone corroborated everything, showed a pattern of escalating behavior over 18 months. What had started as minor meanness had progressed to serious abuse. Finn had been the worst case, the most severe injuries. The incident that finally exposed Blake because Nora had been there to witness and act. Detective Brennan said without that security footage, Blake might have claimed Finn's injuries were accidental, might have blamed Nora for attacking him unprovoked, might have played victim and gotten away with it. The video evidence was irrefutable, showed clear intent, showed planned cruelty, showed Blake was a danger. Blake woke up 4 days after surgery, was arrested in his hospital bed, charged as an adult with 6 counts of child abuse, 3 counts of assault, multiple counts of harassment, and creating harmful material involving minors. His attorney tried arguing that Blake had diminished capacity due to the head injury, that he couldn't be expected to participate in his defense. Dr. Reyes testified that Blake's cognitive function was intact, that memory issues related to the specific incident didn't prevent him from understanding charges or assisting counsel. The judge ordered Blake held without bail, flight risk and danger to community. Blake's parents hired expensive defense attorneys, tried negotiating a plea deal. Prosecutors refused, said the case would go to trial, said the community needed to see justice served, the victims needed to see their abuser held accountable. Blake's attorneys tried another approach, argued that Nora's actions were disproportionate, that a 6-year-old hitting someone with a heavy weapon showed dangerous tendencies, that the focus should be on her psychological evaluation, not their client's prosecution. That strategy backfired spectacularly. The prosecutor released carefully edited portions of the security footage to media. Showed Blake abusing Finn, showed Nora's protective intervention. Public outrage was immediate and intense. Blake became the face of predatory childcare workers. Nora became a symbol of childhood resilience and protective courage. News outlets requested interviews. I declined all of them. Nora didn't need that exposure, didn't need to be paraded as a hero when she was still processing trauma. But the public attention did serve a purpose, put pressure on Blake's defense team, made it clear that any attempt to vilify Nora would be met with massive backlash. The defense changed tactics again, tried arguing that Blake himself was a victim, that he'd been bullied at school, had untreated mental health issues, needed help, not punishment. The prosecutor countered with Blake's social media, posts showing him bragging about his babysitting money, joking with friends about stupid kids and easy work, laughing about parents who paid him to watch kids he considered annoying. No evidence of mental illness, just entitlement and cruelty. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day. Julia and I took turns, so one of us was always with Nora and Finn. Our children were healing. Finn's shoulder recovered fully. His speech therapist said he might have some lingering anxiety, but was resilient. Nora was seeing a child psychologist, working through the trauma. She had nightmares sometimes, dreams about Blake hurting Finn and her not being fast enough. Her therapist said that was normal, said Nora had done something extraordinary under impossible circumstances and would need time to integrate that experience. The trial featured testimony from 6 children Blake had abused. From their parents, from police, from Dr. Reyes explaining Blake's injuries, from child psychologists explaining the impact of Blake's behavior. The defense put on minimal case. Blake didn't testify. His attorneys argued for leniency based on his age, his potential, his lack of prior record. The jury deliberated for 4 hours, convicted Blake on every count. Sentencing came 2 weeks later. Blake's parents begged for mercy, said their son had made mistakes but deserved a chance to rehabilitate, said prison would destroy his future. The judge allowed victim impact statements. Julia and I both spoke, described finding our children bloody and traumatized, described Nora's nightmares, described Finn's anxiety, described the betrayal of trusting someone to protect our children only to have that person hurt them deliberately. Other families spoke. 8-year-old girl whose parents had trusted Blake. 5-year-old boy who still flinched when strangers approached. Each family telling the same story. Trusted Blake. Blake hurt their children. Blake showed no remorse. The judge listened to everything, then delivered sentence. Blake was 17, legally an adult for sentencing purposes. Maximum security juvenile detention until age 21, then transfer to adult facility. Total sentence 20 years with possibility of parole after 12. The courtroom was silent. Blake's mother sobbed. His father stared at the floor. Blake showed no reaction, just stood there, empty. We left the courthouse and went home, started rebuilding our lives. Nora went back to school. Her teacher and principal had been briefed on what happened, provided extra support. Other parents had heard about the trial. Some of them approached us, thanked Nora for exposing Blake, said their children had been on Blake's potential babysitting list. We'd unknowingly protected dozens of families. Nora didn't understand why people treated her differently, why adults called her brave. She'd just done what needed to be done, protected her brother. That simplicity was both beautiful and concerning. Her therapist said Nora needed to understand that what she'd done was exceptional, but not normal. That most situations didn't require violence. That asking for help was usually the right choice. But in that specific moment, with those specific circumstances, she'd made the only choice that saved Finn. Learning to live with that complexity would take time. Dr. Reyes contacted us again 3 months after the trial. Said his research team had put together a proposal, wanted to study Nora's threat assessment capabilities, non-invasively, just cognitive testing, spatial reasoning, pattern recognition, anatomical awareness, understanding how a 6-year-old had demonstrated such precise targeting. I discussed it with Julia and Nora. Our daughter was curious, asked what the doctors wanted to know. I explained they wanted to understand how her brain worked, how she'd made decisions so quickly under stress. Nora thought about it, then said, okay. Said, if it helped other kids stay safe, it was worth doing. The testing took place over 6 weeks, 2 hours every Saturday. Dr. Reyes and his team gave Nora puzzles, showed her anatomy diagrams, asked her to identify weak points on different structures. Nora had no formal training but scored exceptionally high on spatial reasoning and vulnerability assessment. Could look at an object and identify where force would cause maximum damage. Could calculate angles and impact points intuitively. The research team was fascinated, published a paper in a pediatric trauma journal titled Intuitive Threat Response and Anatomical Targeting in a 6-Year-Old Child, a Case Study in Protective Violence. Used Nora's case anonymously, but the medical community knew. Dr. Reyes started receiving requests from other researchers, emergency response trainers, self-defense instructors. Everyone wanted to understand how to replicate or develop the capabilities Nora had demonstrated. Dr. Reyes emphasized that Nora's actions weren't something to glorify or teach, but understanding the cognitive process could help identify and protect children who demonstrated similar protective instincts before they were forced to use them. Could help develop better ways to empower children to recognize danger without placing responsibility for violence on them. The research spawned a pilot program, teaching children aged 5 to 10 about body autonomy, threat recognition, and when to seek help versus when to act. Nora participated in the program development, helped researchers understand how she'd thought through her choices. Her input was invaluable. 5 years after the incident, Nora was 11, starting middle school. She'd grown taller, more confident, still gentle with younger kids, still protective of Finn, who was now 8 and thriving. Nora had developed an interest in medicine, specifically trauma care. Dr. Reyes had stayed in touch, invited Nora to shadow him occasionally at the hospital, showed her how doctors treated injuries, explained anatomy and physiology. Nora absorbed everything. Julia joked that we were raising the world's youngest trauma surgeon. Nora said maybe, said she wanted to understand how bodies worked, how they broke, and how to fix them. Said knowing how to hurt people meant she should know how to heal them too. That moral reasoning was sophisticated for an 11-year-old. Her therapist said Nora had integrated the traumatic incident into a coherent self-narrative, had transformed protective violence into motivation for protective healing, was developing healthy coping mechanisms and strong ethical framework. Blake was still in juvenile detention. Would be transferred to adult prison in 6 years. We didn't follow his case closely. Didn't need to. He was contained. Justice had been served. The families he'd hurt were healing, some faster than others. The Kingston's daughter had struggled. Blamed herself for not reporting Blake sooner. Her parents got her into intensive therapy. She was doing better, learning that Blake's actions weren't her responsibility, that adults had failed to protect her, not the other way around. The other families had similar stories, each child processing trauma differently, each family finding their path forward. We stayed connected with some of them. Support network of people who understood what we'd experienced, who knew the specific betrayal of hiring someone to protect your children and having them cause harm instead. That shared understanding helped. Made the healing less isolating. 10 years after the incident, Nora was 16, sophomore in high school, straight A student, volunteer at Dr. Reyes's trauma center. She'd decided on medicine, wanted to specialize in pediatric trauma surgery, wanted to help kids who couldn't help themselves. Dr. Reyes had written recommendation letters for her, said Nora demonstrated exceptional aptitude and rare emotional maturity, said her understanding of anatomy and protective instinct made her ideal candidate for trauma medicine. Nora applied to competitive summer programs for high school students interested in healthcare, got accepted to Johns Hopkins, spent 6 weeks learning surgical techniques on simulation models, came home more determined than ever, told us she'd found her calling. Julia and I watched our daughter grow into someone extraordinary, someone who'd faced impossible choice at 6 years old and made it, someone who'd lived with consequences and transformed them into purpose. Blake was transferred to adult prison when he turned 21, applied for early parole at year 12, was denied, would serve his full 20 years, would be 38 when released, would have to register as sex offender for crimes against children, would have limited employment options, limited housing options, limited life. His parents had divorced, his father remarried, his mother wrote letters occasionally, asked how we were doing, apologized again for Blake, said she'd failed as a parent, hadn't seen the warning signs, hadn't stopped him before he'd hurt so many children. We responded politely. Said we hoped she'd found peace. We had. We'd built good lives despite what Blake had done, had raised our children to be strong and compassionate, had found meaning in trauma. That was more than Blake would ever have. Nora graduated medical school at 26, completed residency in trauma surgery at 31, and became the youngest female chief of pediatric trauma at University Hospital at 34, working alongside Dr. Reyes, who still kept that case study on his shelf and sometimes told new residents about the 6-year-old who demonstrated surgical precision with a cast iron skillet before she'd known what surgery was. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.